Thanks for tuning in to more NFL Draft Talk on the Ourlads Football Network as we go inside the Philadelphia Eagles with Mike Kaye, beat reporter for NJ.com and also co-host of the At the No Huddle show. Mike, good talking to you again.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And, of course, Ryan Dunleavy joining me, co-host of our weekly show during the season, and occasionally comes back to join us whenever we have on a guest that he is very familiar with.
What's up? Yep, Mike and I worked together at NJ.com and the Star Ledger for maybe a year or so before I left for the Post. So I know a lot of guys who cover the Eagles. We seem to have a pretty good array of Eagles guests on here.
Yeah, let's try and stick with one if we can.
No, I like to rotate it. You get as many different opinions as
That's
possible.
True.
It's a polarizing team.
For sure.
All right, Mike. So let's start off first of all. We might as well start with the big story, and that was how the Eagles were able to swap up ahead of the Giants and steal Devonta Smith from out under them. How is that going for an Eagles perspective? What was because we heard a lot of things about how it all went down. So what exactly happened? How did it go down?
Well, the Giants were foolish, and basically it was the worst kept secret in the NFL that Devonta Smith was the apple of Dave Gettleman's eye. I mean, it was like Dave Gettleman hadn't been in the NFL for the past 30 years. The Eagles knew what was up. They had originally targeted a corner. They were really interested in J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain. Those two guys come off the board in near succession. And then, once those guys were off the board, their third target ultimately was Devonta Smith. Well, I shouldn't say third target, but the three guys that they wanted were the corners and Devonta Smith. So when you see those first two guys come off the board, if you want to land one of your three guys, you're going to have to trade up. And if you follow my reporting, you know that I never thought that they were going to stick at 12. That was never going to happen. They traded back so that they could see how the board kind of fell and see what they could do while also getting a 2022 first round pick. And that's what they did. They traded up into the top 10, got their guy, and they're pretty happy with him. This is a guy who's immediately made a mark on the coaching staff, on fellow players. You could read it's tagged to my Twitter page, but Devonta Smith is a different kind of cat. He's a dude who's going to outwork everybody. He's like obsessive with his technique and his route running ability. Yeah, he weighs 170 pounds, but he also has maybe the best footwork you've ever seen from a college player coming out. So they're very happy with the guy they got. There seems to be a lot of optimism in that regard because they do have wide receiver needs. But, I mean, this is on the Giants. This is 100% on the Giants. Everybody in the league knew what was happening. You look at the 49ers. I always thought they were going to take Trey Lance because you look at the outlook of the pick, but they somehow tricked a bunch of people into thinking they wanted Mac Jones, and they had an easier route. I mean, they had a harder route to convince people than the Giants actually did. The Giants could have thrown out that they like Micah Parsons, and then this probably would not have happened.
All right. Well, then you mentioned how important the cornerback position was for them. They really don't take anybody except Zach Mcpherson, who Ourlads has as a 7th-round grade prospect, and the Eagles took him early. So there was something that they liked about the kid. That's how the NFL goes. It only takes one GM to like a player. Don't care how their grade system is. But still, I mean, that's a player that I can't imagine is going to come in right away and be a difference maker. So that's still an opening. It's still a spot on the roster that needs to be filled, isn't it? Cornerback?
Yeah, absolutely. They came into the draft with that being their biggest need, and they left the draft with that being their biggest need. Though they do like Zach quite a bit. They're going to play more zone coverage, which will help him out. But really, you have Darius Slay and a bunch of guys you either have never heard of or regret knowing who they are. You know what I mean? It's not like it's a clear issue for them. And, it could be the story that makes or breaks their season. But if you listen to Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman's pretty confident that there will be time to address the cornerback position. If you go back to 2017, they made a trade for Ronald Darby in the middle of the preseason. He ended up being their starting corner in the Super Bowl. So I think they feel pretty confident. I think there are guys who are going to be on the block. I do think when you look at their 2022 draft ammunition, they have the ability to kind of maneuver with future assets. And then you look at the trade chip of Zach Ertz, who come June 1 on Tuesday, they'll save $8.5 million by trading or releasing him. With that in mind, you could use a chunk of that savings to either sign a veteran at the cornerback position or trade for one. So I think they feel pretty confident if that's like their only major glaring need. But depending on who you ask, they might have more glaring needs.
Tell me about Landon Dickerson. You wrote a really good feature on Landon Dickerson. Probably shouldn't have been a second-round pick. I was surprised he was there. But when's he going to be ready? What's the expectation? Because when I think Eagles drafting an injured guy, I think Sidney Jones, and that was a disaster.
Yeah, and I think that's, Ryan, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's a lot of what the fan base is concerned about. What I would caution you with is ACL injuries for offensive linemen are different than Achilles injuries for a corner, right? Because, you know, with corners, your Achilles, you really have to be able to push off. You have to maintain speed. You have to maintain confidence in your lower legs. For Landon Dickerson, you know, he's been through this before. He's had another ACL surgery, so he kind of knows what the progression is going to be. So I guess in that case, you feel a little bit more confident because he was the best center in college football last year, even after having an ACL injury and 2 tightrope ankle injuries. But like you said, his injury history is extensive. I've spoken to a lot of scouts who have said that he would have been a surefire first-round pick had he not had the injury this time. So, I mean, he doesn't want to put a timeline on himself, but the dude was doing backflips like at a pro day in March, right? Like he tore his ACL in December and took a ceremonial last snap in the national championship game. This dude just built differently. And so I think the outlook for them, the Eagles have a decent a pretty good starting 5, even if you don't count Landon Dickerson. So I think they'll move him along slowly, maybe those first couple of games. Have Isaac Seumalo start at left guard, and then it's anybody's, you know, guess as to when he's going to be a starter. But he will be a starter by the time the season ends. If he's healthy, he's got all-pro potential. If he's not, this is going to make or break their draft class, no matter how good Devontae Smith is.
And we can't talk about the Eagles draft without that famous video now, right? Of how we wrote one of these, no fist bump. Tell people who might not be as in tune as you and I, that video, I think Howie made a trade, right? And like not everybody in the room was thrilled that he moved down a couple spots and got a 6th-round pick, and they lost out on one of their targets. What happened there, and how have the Eagles kind of explained away what seems like a pretty embarrassing moment?
Yeah, so for those who haven't seen the video, Tom Donahoe, there's former GM with the Bills and I believe the Steelers, was in the draft room, and I guess ESPN cameras caught Howie Roseman taking a victory lap, and Tom Donahoe wanted very little part of that. So what happened was they traded back 3 spots because the Panthers were interested in a player, and then
third round, right?
Yeah, in the 3rd round, the Eagles had interest in 3 players. One of them came off the board, the nose tackle that went to the Lions, and that was who Donahoe wanted. The Eagles ended up taking Milton Williams, who defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon was absolutely like awestruck they were able to land because of his versatility. And look, that's going to happen in draft rooms, right? But if any team couldn't handle being caught on camera having a disagreement, it was the Eagles. If you know anything about them locally or in the NFC East, it just seems like turmoil always kind of follows them. Howie Roseman has reportedly had history of going rogue. Like, there's a lot there. But what I will say is this. When you talk to people around the league, they really like the Milton Williams pick. Like, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that. The issue is they did get cute. Like if you know, a 6th-round pick.
Like you can make a case what he did in the first round was too cute. It worked out for him, but he does get a little too. He does have a little bit of, from afar, a little bit of I'm the smartest guy in the room, and sometimes he is, and sometimes that backfires.
Right. There's definitely some hubris, and I think, you know, Donahoe's like an old school GM, right? Like he's like, just take the guy. But also in the NFL, nose tackles aren't at the value that they used to be. And you look at Milton Williams, who can play 3 technique, he can play 5 technique, he can play some 7. Like they can move him around, and that seems to be what Jonathan Gannon's really embracing, is like this hybrid system. It looks like they might use a 4-3 under, which is very interesting to me because they don't really have the coverage that would typically come with that. If you have bad coverage units, you are going to get blown away with a hybrid scheme up front. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think Greg brought up Zech Mcpherson earlier. Zech McPherson's a guy that they were going to look into with that 2nd, 3rd round pick that they ended up trading to Dallas. They had him highly, highly rated. I know the boards everywhere. I've talked to some scouts who thought he could be a 3rd or 4th round pick. I've talked to other scouts who thought he could be an undrafted free agent. So like, this is like a really polarizing pick. But I think when you look back, the Eagles got a guy who fit what they were trying to do. I think just taking a guy who's a nose tackle isn't really as shiny to the coaching staff as it would be to the scouting staff, if that makes sense.
Well, taking a look at Ourlads, they actually talked about Williams being the top-rated athletic defensive tackle in the class. So I could see exactly where the Eagles or some members of the Eagles would have been, you know, really happy with that pick. And by the way, before we move on, I just want to remind everybody to check out the Ourlads 2021 draft publication out now at Ourlads.com. So if you're an Eagle fan and you're listening to watching this show, I'm sure you are, check it out. And there's going to be probably around as many as 10 profiles from the undrafted players who we're going to get into in a little while, as well as all the players who were drafted, profiled here in the Ourlads guide. And the draft review guide comes out in about a month. This is last year's. So keep in mind about that at Ourlads.com. I wanted to go over, Mike, the fact that I was looking over all of the picks and what stood out to me. All right, Kenneth Gainwell, 2,069 all-purpose yards in 2019 with 16 touchdowns. Taron Jackson, the 6th-round pick, 44.5 tackles for loss, 26.5 sacks. Patrick Johnson, the 7th-round draft pick, 40 tackles for loss, 24.5 career sacks with 6 forced fumbles. Undrafted free agent Jaquan Bailey, Iowa State sack leader all-time with 25.5 sacks. Undrafted wide receiver Trevon Grimes, 9 touchdowns in 11 games last year. That's a lot of production from a lot of these players in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you've kind of got to project where that production would go into, you know, your lineup. Kenneth Gainwell, to me, was a huge steal. I thought he was going to be taken at the bottom of the 2nd round. He fits exactly what Nick Sirianni likes to do with running backs. Nick Sirianni historically has worked under play callers who like to assign specific roles to their running backs. And if you watch the Indianapolis Colts the last few years, Nyheim Hines was a guy that they used kind of as a receiver first running back. And Kenneth Gainwell is basically a clone of him. So I think that fits in really, really well with what they have in Miles Sanders. They picked up Kerryon Johnson after the draft, which was a very intriguing pickup. So I really like what they did there. You talk about Taron Jackson. He's going to be a guy that they kind of move in there, and he'll be a developmental guy behind Ryan Kerrigan, Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett, and Josh Sweat. But when you look at this group of pass rushers, you need that sort of like high upside, low floor kind of guy, because realistically, Josh Sweat's a free agent next year. Derek Barnett's a free agent next year. Ryan Kerrigan's a free agent next year, and Brandon Graham will be in his mid-30s. So like, there's got to be some overarching development there. And that's what this coaching staff is known for. The previous coaching staff was terrible. I mean, look, they got hot in 2017, but they couldn't really develop anybody. And so this coaching staff, their key is development and technique. and they're going to really have to prove it with this pass rush.
I mentioned, and by the way, there are five, if you want to include Bailey out of this draft class up front, defensive line, front seven players. I want to ask you about the couple of those free agents that are the top guys, Grimes, who I mentioned, and Jamie Newman, the quarterback, the Wake Forest transfer with Georgia. Newman actually seems to be a good fit for what the Eagles do. I mean, he's going to be a developmental guy. There ain't no question about that. But he's a guy that the team didn't have to draft. So that's kind of nice. And Grimes, again, very productive at the University of Florida, broke out this past year. Very surprised that Grimes did not get drafted. So are those clearly the top two guys to keep an eye on that were not drafted?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at Newman, the Eagles had two quarterbacks, so and they didn't draft. Yeah. So you say to yourself, well, they're going to keep three, whether one's in the practice squad or not. So it's basically like, you're getting a free job if you can play well. And historically, the Eagles haven't kept their third quarterback on the practice squad since 2017. Nate Sudfeld's been on the main roster ever since. So they're likely. Yeah, right, exactly. They're a team that's like obsessed with the quarterback position. So if he plays well, they're not going to risk him to the waiver wire. They're not going to risk him to the practice squad. He'll be on the roster, and I think
maybe he'll play week 17 when the game absolutely means something to most of the league and nothing to the Eagles. Yeah, maybe that's
maybe. Who knows? No one can predict the future. It worked out for them, didn't it? Like they got a future first round pick and DeVonta Smith. But anyway, so I think Newman is a guy that, Nick Sirianni worked with Jacoby Brissett in Indianapolis. They're very similarly built. Brian Johnson, their quarterbacks coach, was a star at Utah. Similar skill set. Has worked with guys like Dak Prescott in the past. So he understands how to take advantage of a big mobile quarterback. And I think his success or his future in the league is really tied to Jalen Hurts, right? Because if Jalen Hurts plays very well, Jamie Newman's the ideal skill set and player to be behind Jalen Hurts long term, right? So I think that's an interesting marriage there, even with Joe Flacco peanut butter and jellied in between the two of them, which Ryan would love a peanut butter and jelly right now. I know that. And then you bring up Grimes. So I brought up Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson was his offensive coordinator for the Gators last year. So there's that connection. That's how they kind of got him. Grimes is a guy who's got a unique build. He's built like a truck at wide receiver. He's a guy who you can maybe see as a tight end down the road. Florida likes to have those like hybrid players at wide receiver and tight end. And the Eagles really don't have a large infrastructure on their depth chart of tight end talent with upside. They also really don't have guys who can play the X position full time. So Grimes is going to be in that spot where he can compete for the backup X spot and maybe even get some looks at tight end. If they feel froggy, maybe they'll jump on the fact that he's built like a tight end.
So I want to get into something a little bigger picture than the draft. For people who are listening, beat writers know their teams better than the national media does. They might not break as much news, but the people who are there every day have a sense for how good the team is. When you see them practice, etc., when you know the depth chart like the back of your hand, if you can name the fifth defensive tackle on your team, you have a good feel as a beat writer.
Right.
I think the Eagles are terrible. I think the Eagles are one of the 5 worst teams in the NFL. So when the schedule came out, a bunch of my friends who cover the Eagles, Elliot Shore Parks, had them go with 11 wins. My head exploded. The next day, Mike said, I forget what the exact tweet was, but I think you had something where they were 9 or 10 wins if everything goes right. And I said, it seems like the beat writers know something the rest of us don't. It got a lot of attention from Eagles fans. Like, yeah, that is how it's supposed to work. I'm aware that's how it's supposed to work. I feel like I know the Giants very well. So my point, this is a very long-winded way of saying, what is it you know that the rest of us don't? Like, I think the Eagles are terrible. Why are they not terrible?
So there's a few things that went into that. The division is very interesting. To me, it's wide open. I don't think any team is particularly – like, you could realistically see the Cowboys be in last place because of their defense. The Giants, if Daniel Jones doesn't play well, they're not going to play well, no matter how much they invest in the wide receiver position.
Line to blow up the whole season. Yep.
Right. Washington, Ryan Fitzpatrick's never been a winner. He's put up a lot of great stats, but he's never been a winner. Their offensive line's not very good. Neither is the Giants. But I'm a big believer in old school football, and the Eagles' offensive line and defensive lines are better than anybody else's in the division. Also, they play a very weak schedule. Like, they could easily tear off 6 non-division wins. And I think that's what I'm kind of focused on. I also think when you look at this division, typically new coaching staffs tend to excel early on. You look at Ron Rivera. You look at Doug Peterson. You look at, when Jason Garrett originally took over, Ben McAdoo. Like, teams that typically don't have an established culture typically do well out the gate. And so while I think the Eagles on paper have a lot of weaknesses, their strengths are what typically win you games. I also think Jalen Hurts is a guy who gives you, versatility as a play caller. Nick Sirianni, we don't know what the hell this guy's going to do.
No, that's what's, yeah.
Well, and thing. Here, I'll give you a little tidbit. Around the league, Jonathan Gannon's considered like the defensive Sean McVay. Like, this is a really, really well thought of dude. He's going to be a head coach in the next 2 years. And I think with their eye on development, I think that that's very, very helpful. I think when you look at the reason why the previous staff failed is they had so many injuries. They had a lot of players who just didn't develop. And it seems like the front office and coaching staff seem to be a lot more in sync this year than the previous regime during the final 2 years there. Look, if you told me that they were going to finish in last place, I wouldn't argue with you. But I do think this team can easily win 9 games. If they can split the division and they can beat the teams that are weak in this division. Like, here's the thing. They start off the season against the Falcons. I don't know how they don't win that game. Outside of maybe a screw up on defense here or there. Then they play San Francisco, which
the Falcons have the better quarterback and the better player.
They don't trade Julio Jones, and the Eagles don't sign a cornerback.
Yeah, but their defense is terrible.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think when you look at San Francisco, right? San Francisco's stacked, but if their quarterback position isn't up to par, yikes. Then they play Dallas. I think Dallas is going to win the division. I think Dallas is the most naturally talented team, but they have clear weaknesses up front. They have clear weaknesses in the secondary. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Look, and I think the Eagles are kind of in this weird spot where they have to play a bunch of games in like a really short amount of time. But after that, they don't really have to travel after, I think, like they don't have to fly after like week 9 or week 10, something like that. So that's also helpful. I think the extra game also helps them. They play the Jets. The Jets have never beaten the Eagles. It's never happened. It's never happened in the regular season. So like there's one. There you go. There's one. I mean, like they play the Lions. They play the Chargers out at home. They play Vegas. Like there's going to be opportunities for this team to get wins. I just think it's how quickly can this thing be concocted? Because I really buy into Nick Sirianni. I think Nick Sirianni is a guy.
That was the next question. Tell me about Sirianni, yeah.
So Nick Sirianni's like a really interesting cat, right? So I wrote about this. I did a feature on him a while ago, but he got into the business by basically stalking Todd Haley. And so he got on a roll there. His background's wide receivers, which was the Eagles' biggest weakness for the last several years. They draft a wide receiver in the first round. I think he's going to put Jalen Reagor in a much better position to succeed. Jalen Reagor was not used to his strength last year.
I think I read from you that he's moving to the slot now.
Yeah, he's going to play more in the slot. They're going to rotate Smith at the slot, X, Z, everywhere. And then Reagor will play Z and move in the slot. They'll have Travis Fulgham at X. Like, they're going to do things that are very different than what Doug Peterson did. Doug Peterson was very 12 personnel oriented. This will be more of an 11 personnel group with 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 running back. But I think they put an emphasis on teachers, and Nick Sirianni is known for getting stuff out of players, like getting extra. Like you look at Zach Pascal, who went from being an undrafted free agent that nobody wanted to a legitimate starting wide receiver in the NFL. You look at what he did with Tyrell Williams. Keenan Allen's best years were under him. So he knows wide receivers. He's also a former quarterbacks coach. And I think that that's helpful as well. This is a very young staff, but youth doesn't always mean, ignorance. Sometimes it just means like, yeah, right. Exactly. Like there's a lot of upside here. And look, you and I have been covering the NFL for years on the beat level. When a team's unlikable, when a team doesn't have a very good, training camp or locker room energy. Guess what? This is a very likable team, the way they've assembled this one. It seems like everybody, like even the older players are kind of on like, hey, these dudes all have energy. The one thing that stands out with Nick Sirianni and his staff is energy. And I think that that's really important. They've brought in all of these young coaches who, like their linebackers coach is 27. And he's out there running drills with players. Like there's, it's kind of the opposite of the Joe Judge staff where they're the Patriots way. This is like the antithetical approach to the Patriots way. This is like, hey, look, we're all relatable. Let's just win this. You know what I mean? And I think the division is, here's the thing. I don't know if having covered Gus Bradley in Jacksonville, I don't know if that can work long-term, but I think it'll offer like a jet of success early on. So I think look, they'll go as far as Jalen Hurts, Sirianni take them, really. And I think Jalen Hurts comes into this division at least on par with Daniel Jones as far as, hey.
See, I disagree. I haven't seen anything from Jalen, and he could be better, he could be worse.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Either they could be really, really good or they could be really, really bad. And I think that's kind of intriguing. Like, what Dak Prescott is, what Ryan Fitzpatrick is. But from the Giants and Eagles perspective, if Daniel Jones gets hot, they're going to run away with this division. If Jalen Hurts gets hot, they're going to beat on some dudes. You know what I mean?
Before I let you go, Mike, a couple more things quickly. So Zach Ertz, percentage, 100 or what, that he will be gone?
When does this air?
I'm probably going to actually let it air on Monday so we can get through the weekend, which is the Memorial Day. Probably actually the day after Memorial Day. It would be a better day to air it.
Okay, so that's Tuesday. Okay, so when this airs is a very, very big day.
That's right. There you go.
At 4 p.m., the Eagles go from being able to save $4.9 million to $8.5 million. I'd say it's a 95% chance. He's one of the veterans that did not show up for Nick Sirianni's first offseason program. He wants a change of scenery. The Eagles know they don't want to pay him. They also only have $3.8 million in salary cap space. They've got to figure out a way to pay their rookie class. This just seems inevitable. And frankly, I think it would benefit both sides because Zach Ertz values himself very highly. I don't know if the league values him as highly at $8.5 million a year, and it's going to be a reality check for him. I also think it's going to be a reality check for the Eagles. They have to figure out what Dallas Goedert's going to be. Dallas Goedert's in the final year of his contract. If he's going to be a true number one tight end and you're going to pay him, you got to see him be the guy for once. And I think when you, like I said earlier, this is going to be more of an 11 personnel offense. If you're going to only play one tight end, you can't have both of them. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation.
Give me like a first or second year player that you think could break out this year.
I think Jalen Reagor's going to have a much better second season. I think they're going to use him properly. If you watch him in training camp, he was running crossing routes and getting open like relentlessly. I think moving him to the slot, as Ryan brought up, is a very good move for him. Last year, he dealt with a lot of injury woes. He hurt his shoulder during the last practice of training camp, missed the opener, then had a weird like fluke broken finger that cost him some games. So, look, I think a healthy Jalen Reagor can play very, very well. I think he's still going to be an asset in the return game. I think having Devontae Smith puts less pressure on him as well. So Jalen Reagor would be a guy that I really think can step up. And then I think you look at somebody like Alex Singleton, who led the team in tackles, came out of nowhere from the CFL. He's a guy that they're going to put in a position to succeed.
So Reagor would be. You have a fantasy football team?
Not as of now. Not as of now. I took the year off last year, so right now I'm kind of, I'm a man
I'll
without
keep
a
that in
home.
mind because we're building up a dynasty league on Ourlads this year. Are you into dynasty leagues?
Okay. I've never done it, but color me curious.
I'll put you in the loop.
I just traded Julio Jones for a first and a second in my dynasty league. Yeah.
I hope you're excited about him going to the Titans.
All right, Mike. Appreciate it. Great job. Mike. And what are you working on right now?
Well, right now we're doing some draft stuff or post-draft stuff. We're kind of digging into those undrafted free agents. We're going to dig into some of the draft picks, as Ryan could probably presume. And then, look, it's Jalen Hurts all the way. You got to kind of invest in that and in the quarterback position because it's a business.
Mike, appreciate it. We hope you'll get an opportunity to talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you, Ryan.
Take care.
See you, Mike.
All right. Again, check out Mike Kaye and his No Huddle show, which is actually all you have to do is go to at the No Huddle Show. I think that's his. That's the Twitter handle. Where you can check out Mike Kaye, of course, at nj.com, at the No Huddle Show. That's it. So, have you been on his show before, Ryan?
I have not. No. I don't know enough about the Eagles. So.
Oh, I figured maybe he'd be on. No, they're playing the Giants that week.
Yeah.
Why would they have you on to talk about the Eagles?
Yeah. I know him one. I owe him one now, I guess.
That's right. There you go. So again, you made your feelings known about the Eagles already, I guess.
I think they're terrible. I think they remind me of the Giants a couple years ago, where the roster is stale and they're trying to squeeze out one more run from a group of guys like Ertz and Fletcher Cox, who are. It's just not. The time is over. You won your Super Bowl. Time to start fresh. It just strikes me as a very stale roster that doesn't know if it's in win now mode or build for the future mode, and the worst you can be is caught in the middle. And
again, look, it's all also going to be up to Hurts, as we know. I mean, it's a quarterback league.
Yeah, I have no confidence in Hurts.
Yeah, exactly.
You and I have been through this at length. I don't believe in second, third, and fourth round quarterbacks. I don't believe in them. I don't. The evidence is mountainous that they do not work. So if Jalen Hurts was good enough to be a really good starting quarterback, he would have been picked in the first round. No one would have let him get to the middle of the second round if the NFL thought he was good enough. And don't throw me Russell Wilson, because he's the 1 in 37 example of the last, 7 drafts. So yes, if he's Russell Wilson, then they're in a great shape. If he's the other 36 guys, they're not.
Yeah, and look, he definitely has the talent to be a really good backup in the league and a good spot starter, and he might even at some point down the road be a starter. Who knows? But it's incredible. I remember when Zach Wilson got drafted, and I heard somebody, I don't know if it was Kipe or whoever it was. Yeah, but, he's going to need some developmental time. He's got to sit down. Why do they say this? First-round guys who get drafted, unless there's somebody that is an incumbent starter, do not sit anymore.
Cam Newton might start over Mac Jones. At pick 15,
yes.
Yeah, he might. But the number 2 pick is not sitting.
Yeah. It just doesn't happen anymore. And so the reason I was bringing it up is a guy like Hurts, they don't have anyone else to go into Hurts. And here's a guy who was, like you said, picked in the second round, and he's played, less than 5 games, and he's going to be the starter.
They didn't want him to be their quarterback. They wanted Carson Wentz to be their quarterback. They didn't pick him to start.
Yeah.
He's their starter because everything went to crap.
Yeah.
So, it's not like they were like, oh, we got this steal. No, he's their starter because Carson Wentz quit on them.
So. Yeah, so it is one. I mean, but Mike was also right about the fact that it could go either way. And I am surprised that so many, and again, I'm not saying so many because you gave a couple of examples, but how it appears that the guys that are following the Eagles seem to have a positive slant.
Yeah.
I
was at the Giants every day for the last 3 years. I knew the team was terrible. So and they seem to think their team is good. So
well, maybe what hit it was what Mike said. One of the last things he said, as far as how he has this feeling of being around the team. He's getting that feeling about.
But you're not really around the team right now. You're not allowed in the locker room. You can't talk. You get Zooms. Like, good on you if you have sources. And of course Mike does, and that's the feeling you're getting. I'd want to see it with my own eyes, and you can't see anything with your own eyes right now.
Yeah, and it's early. We're in OTAs right now. So when are OTAs over?
Sometime in middle of June.
Oh, they go on for a few weeks?
Yeah.
All right. And then Memorial Day, of course, coming up on Sunday. By the way, we are going to post this show. We post this show immediately, but we're not going to promote it until Tuesday because we want to take advantage as best we can of social media and so forth. But want to thank Mike, definitely, as usual, for joining us. And Ryan, we'll talk to you again sometime soon. Not exactly sure when. This is like the slow... There isn't a slower time of the year to be covering the NFL, but we'll figure out a way to get you back on. What are you working on?
Right now, I'm doing a lot of NBA stuff because, like you said, it's a slow time.
I just saw you did a Jet. What was the Jet thing you just did?
Elijah Moore.
The Elijah Moore one. Okay.
Yeah. I talked to his former wide receivers coach at Ole Miss, the guy who had DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, and Elijah Moore all in the same room. And he said Elijah Moore his Twitter handle is @NastyWideouts. So I'm like, if you can have a Twitter handle @NastyWideouts, you better have coached a lot of nasty wideouts. He said Elijah Moore is both the best route runner and the most self-motivated guy he's ever had. So those are two high compliments when you've had those other guys.
And we'll talk more about that for sure when we talk some Jet football at some point right around training camp. Ryan, appreciate it.
See you guys.